Good day. So my name is Mr. Jonathan David D. De La Cruz. So this session, we will be talking about components of curriculum design as part of our discussion on curriculum development. So previously, we talked about levels of curriculum, the societal level, institutional level, and then the instructional level. But before it reaches the learners, it depends on the experiences. That's why there is an experiential curriculum. Okay, so this session will be talking about the components of curriculum. But before we deal with the four components of curriculum, let's first consider the key concepts. The key concept is just simple. It's identify educational philosophy. It might sound simple, but it's actually quite complex because educational philosophy has to mirror national philosophies and has to address sociocultural needs of the people in that society. And we must also consider that in adding, deleting, or offering new courses, there are a lot of things to consider. The courses that is offered in the 21st century is different in the 20th century and in the 19th century. The structure of education is different previously and what is now because the society changes and so does education and curriculum has to. So, how does one decide on curriculum development? This is at this phase we'll be talking about the components of curriculum. Number 1. So there are four components of curriculum. Number 1 is generating aims, goals and objectives. Number 2 is determining the content and subject matter. Number 3 is the learning experiences and number 4 is the learning environment. So for the aims, analysis of needs and tasks has to be considered, determine students' needs to succeed in school, appropriate content, sequence instructional strategies, and various curricular components. Now, take note that in curriculum development and understanding education, there is no perfect curriculum. What do we have? We only have appropriate curriculum. We do not have perfect curriculum, only appropriate ones. That's why we use the term appropriate content, sequence, instructional strategies, and various curricular components, just like what is happening right now. The online modality is the most appropriate teaching and learning modality at this moment, considering our situation. But it's not appropriate in the previous times. It's also not we do not know if it's still appropriate in the future, but definitely this modality would affect the future curriculum. Okay, so in aims there's something synonymous between aims, goals and objectives. All of these three considers the end goal after an educational experience. Okay, all aims, goals and objectives, these are targets, these are statements that has to be attained after the educational experience, but how long? Okay, what's the difference between the three? Okay, let's take a look at this. Aims is long-term direction for students and system level development. Just to be clear, when we talk about aims, these talks about an entire program, like what is the aim for the K to 12 program. It may take years, not long-term direction. So it can take years, like for the K to 12 program, the kinder and the 12 years in the junior and the elementary years, junior high, and senior high school, with a total of 13 years before the aim can be attained. But the aim can be attained gradually along the way. But in system level development, a lot of things has to consider. Just like what I've mentioned a while ago, it mirrors the society, it mirrors the national policies. Here in the Philippines, our prevailing constitution is a 1987 constitution that states that all schools should aim to. Okay, so these statements are indicated in the Philippine constitution. So a school should aim to inculcate patriotism and nationalism, foster love of humanity, promote respect for human rights, appreciate the role of national heroes in the historical development of the country, teach the rights and duties of citizenship. Now, there are actually 9 statements, but before I proceed to the next 4 statements, is that uh, every curriculum, even if the curriculum changes since 1987 up to K to 12 program that was implemented in 2012, the curriculum, the aim of the curriculum still has to adhere to the statements in the Philippine Constitution. Now, here are the rest: strengthen the ethical and spiritual values, develop moral character and personal discipline, encourage critical and creative thinking, broaden scientific and technological knowledge, and promote vocational efficiencies. All these statements has to be embodied in the curriculum of the Philippines, even starting from 1987 Constitution up to the K to 12 program. But what do you notice? The statements are actually vague and broad, meaning it can be attained using different modalities, using different ways. Okay, so it's up to the curriculum on how to attain and how to embody these aims. According to Ronald Dahl, so apart from national philosophies, because again, it has to mirror national philosophies. Okay, the education system has to mirror national philosophies. According to Ronald Dahl, there are things to consider: the intellectual, which is the cognitive, the social, personal, and the productive, which is effective. So, intellectual aims focus on the acquisition and comprehension of knowledge, problem solving, and methods of thinking. So, it focuses on the mind. The social personal aims are concerned in the ways in which people are relate to other individuals and society and how individuals view themselves. These aims addresses individual psychology and how people fit into their family and community. So this is about interrelationship. So intellectual is the first to consider. Okay, and then followed by the social personal aims. It's about uh, involvement in the community, because after all, as human beings, we are social beings. And then productive aims, this center on educating students to function within the home, on the job, and as a citizen. It is important for us teachers, no, and education developers, curriculum developers, to consider what we want our students to function in their households, in their job, and as a citizen of this country and of the world, of course. So these three has to be considered: intellectual aims, social personal aims, and productive aims, according to Ronald Dahl. Apart from that, according to Ornstein and Hankins, there are four: physical, dealing with the development and maintenance of strong, healthy bodies, and aesthetics, dealing with values and appreciation of the arts; moral, dealing with values and appropriate conduct; spiritual, dealing with transcendence of self. So all these four are recommended by Ornstein and Hankins. It's important to not only focus on the intellect. In developing aims, it's not only important to focus on the intellect. uh, Aims should also focus on the physicality, should also focus on effective way, and based on this statement, spirituality and morality is also very important. Let us always consider that we want a functioning good citizen. Okay, if we want to have a functioning good citizen, we must establish morality. Now, regarding the spirituality, this actually depends on what country, on what society is the education. But in the global perspective, it's encouraged to consider spirituality. But these may vary across different countries. Okay, since different countries have different beliefs as well. Okay. So after developing aims, let's proceed to goals. So goals, they are a group of expectation that may take weeks, months, or years to attain. Now, when we talk about aims, we're talking about the length here is around 12 years if it's K to 12. For an entire program, for a 4 or 5 year program, it takes 4 or 5 years before the educational aims are attained. Okay, from the graduates or from the products of the institution. But for the goals, this may take weeks, this may take months, or a year. This may fall on 1 quarter in an entire academic year. There are 4 quarters. there could be one goal, there could be a set of goals for one quarter, there could be a set of goals for an entire semester, there could be a set of goals for the entire term, there could be a set of goals for the entire academic year. But it has to adhere to the educational aims. Okay, so starting from formative evaluation aims, consider the goals. Okay, so if you are hitting the goals of the entire quarter, the entire trimester or sem, you're hitting the entire goal of the year. Therefore, you are also influencing on attaining the aims. But now later we'll also discuss this. Objectives helps address these educational goals to be attained. And then summative evaluation. Okay, goals are more specific than aims. As I have mentioned, aims are quite vague and broad because it takes very, very long time in order for it to be attained. Okay, not very, very long time, but quite it takes longer compared to goals and objectives. Okay, because objectives and goals falls under aims. And the aims wants to answer what destination you have in mind for learners as far as particular curriculum or subject is concerned. Example, at the end of this course, the student should be able to. Those are the statements of the goals. At the end of this quarter, at the end of this semester, at the end of this trimester, okay, students should be able to acquire this certain set of standards, attain these certain sets of educational goals. Okay, those are goals. And then let's go to objectives. So that's aims. Okay, aims are longer to be attained an entire program. Goals are under aims because once you're hitting the goals, you're also hitting the aims. The goals, the educational goals may vary. It can be per quarter, per term, per semester, or an entire academic year. But objectives are for short term, must be clear, specified to understand and agree on, must be appropriate and arranged logically, and requires regular revision. Take note that objectives are specific. It could only be for one lesson, one day, or one lesson. Sometimes one lesson can take 2 days because of the difficulty. But objectives most of the time is per day. Um, these are further descriptions. Should describe behavior stated analytically and specifically, developmental rather than terminal, which was stated here also that it should be uh, regularly revised because again the needs or the set of certain set of knowledge fields of knowledge actually varies or changes every year. Like there's a new update about understanding diseases, if example that's in science. Now we want to contextualize it. So when you want to contextualize a certain objective, you have to change it. Okay, so that's why it's developmental rather than terminal. Aims are terminal because it's established there already and it may change, but it will take a long time in order for it to change. Okay, and goals, objectives has to be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. This is smart. Okay, it has to be measurable, attainable, realistic, and time bound. In developing your objectives, ideally, we want to hit three objective domains. The cognitive, that's minds on, psychomotor, hands on, and affective, hearts on. Again, cognitive, minds on, psychomotor, hands on, affective, hearts on. These are the three objective domains. And when we are writing objectives, ideally, we want to show this. Okay, we want to attain this. But there are a lot of topics that you cannot actually join them, all of them. But somehow, at least, no, join two, like cognitive, psychomotor, cognitive, affective. Okay. because these are very, very important. Okay. Um, it's encouraged to at least have two in your set of lesson or set of topics. Okay, but we want, ideally again, we want three. When we are developing lesson objectives, it's encouraged to have three, but you can actually have four or five. You cannot exceed to that because you cannot, no, you cannot abuse your students. Okay, you cannot, that's, you're asking too much from the students. Okay, it's no longer realistic. It's no longer time bound. It's already difficult for you as a teacher, especially for your students. Okay, so time tested, before we proceed on discussing the overview on the development of objectives, let's visit the time tested principles of teaching and learning. So we have effective learning begins with setting clear expectations and learning outcomes. Make sure that your objectives are clear, clearly stated. Um, and make sure that it adheres to the statements that I said a while ago, that it should be smart. Learning is an active process. What I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. Consider the senses. So consider the involvement of different senses in giving your activities or in giving your learning experience to your learners in order for them to have an active learning. Learning is a discovery of personal meaning of ideas. Students are given the opportunity to connect what they learn with other concepts learned, with real world experience, and with their own lives. Take note, dear students, that um, learning is not only a one way process. And at the end of the session, at the end of all the teaching that your teachers do, at the end of the teaching and learning activities, we want is a meaningful learning. So what is a meaningful learning? A meaningful learning is when the students are able to use the set of knowledge that they learned inside the classroom in the real life, or the students can relate to the discussion because they have experienced it. Experiences plays a vital role on the teaching and learning process, whether it is important on their daily lives or it is important on their job or on their training or on their program. Say, for example, that a certain course is important for the set of job, but may not be important for the other set of jobs. And when we talk about meaningful learning, we want to have our learners understand the purpose of our classroom instructions. And that's what we want. For our learners to use what we taught them inside the classroom, cognitively, psychomotor, and effectively, of course. And or they can share their experiences in our classroom because they have experienced it already. Also, in the 21st century education, learning is a cooperative and collaborative process. Take note that the 21st century education, competition is no longer an option. Cooperation and collaborative is very important. That's why if you notice at the basic education, a lot of group activities are given. Okay? A lot of group activities are given. So, let's talk about the different objectives. What I'm going to share to you are just limited because there's a different course or discussion on objective development. I'll just give you an overview. So there are three. We have the cognitive domain, famously uh, the famous person to cite here is Benjamin Bloom. Affective domain is David Krathwohl, his student. And then for psychomotor domain, Elizabeth Simpson. So again, there are a lot of levels, but these are ideally what we use. Okay. So let's start off with cognitive domain. So in the cognitive domain, we have Benjamin Bloom. This is actually a revised uh, levels of cognitive domain. Um, this was revised by Krathwohl and Bloom. So Krathwohl is a former student of Benjamin Bloom. So there are levels. So we have remembering, understanding, applying. Those are lots. lower order thinking skills. And then we also have HOTS, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So just to give you a brief overview on on creating. Why is creating the highest form of thinking? Is that when you create something, you are already contributing to the body of knowledge. The most iconic activity or learning experience is um, writing a thesis paper or making an essay is the simplest, because when you make an essay or writing something, you're already writing on paper what's on your mind. So you are collecting all information that you have, educated information that you have, and contextualizing it to write your own idea or to write your own opinion, to write your own conclusion. That's why it's creating. Creating is the highest form. It's when you create or contribute to the body of knowledge. Okay. Next is for affective domain, we have David Crathwall. We have receiving, responding, valuing, organization, and characterization. So to give you an example about this is example that you're taking a subject on environmental science, and the topic is about proper waste disposal. Now, your professor or your teacher is talking about uh, properly throwing your trashes or your dirt. Okay. And then when you receive, no, that's when the teacher talks and you listen. When you respond, it's either you share something you did on proper disposal, or you just nod. Just yes, I agree with you, sir. No. But when you value, you are already you're already committing to that statement on proper disposal. And when you organize and characterize it, no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you try to practice proper waste disposal because you have already developed it as your own personal philosophy. So you see, the topic is cognitive, like proper waste disposal, but it can also be affective. The best part is that it can fall on characterizing when the student now performs this wherever they go. So that's characterizing. Okay. For the psychomotor domain, so I hope this is clear. You can review on this. For psychomotor, we have Elizabeth Simpson. So there are different levels. Again, there are different proponents that you can check, but I prefer Elizabeth Simpson. So we have perception, set, guided response, mechanism, complex response, adaption, and origination. So example, you're taking a dance class. When your dance instructor or dance teacher is dancing, you're watching. That's the first part, watching their movements. When it comes to set and response, you are already doing, you're already trying to follow the steps. And then when it comes to mechanism, you already know the steps even without the guide or without the guide of your dance instructor. Complex overt response is when you perform difficult steps already. And and origination is when you actually create your own steps. Okay, that are more functional and actually better. No, that's just an example. So on psychomotor domain, it's important that it doesn't only fall on courses or subjects that are very physical. Say, let's go to sciences. Performing laboratory activities, these could fall on psychomotor, like mixing or transferring. No, those are psychomotor activities, simple psychomotor activities. So please take note of that. Those three triangles that I showed you, the levels of learning, levels of objectives on cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. Okay. So please take note that those are the aims, goals, and objectives. In developing your aims, your goals, and your objectives, always consider the learners. Always consider the society, always consider the national philosophies and policies, and also consider the school. But most importantly, always consider the learners. So we have the aims. The aims are quite longer. The aims talks about the entire program, and then goals talks about the entire learning experiences on an entire term or an entire subject or an entire year. And objective talks about per day or per lesson. So when you actually attain the daily objective consistently, you also attain the goals for the entire quarter. And when you attain consistently the goals for the entire quarter in all the quarters that you taught, therefore you are already helping attain gradually the aims of the program. Okay, so we have the aims, the goals, and the objectives. Okay, so that's the first curriculum component, the generating goals, aims, goals, and objectives. Please stand by for the next video. We'll be talking about the content and subject matter, as well as learning experience, as well as the learning environment. Okay. Thank you for listening. God bless.